Hi, my name is Ken. Welcome to Pro Chef 101. This is a new YouTube channel that we're starting because I have a passion for cooking and I want to teach cooking. They don't teach cooking anymore. They just give you recipes and show you how to do it and have game shows. Those game shows aren't teaching you anything. They're really basically novices that haven't had a lot of experience. I've got 35 years of experience, graduated from the Culinary Institute of America, went there in 1969 in the old days, and I'm old school. My nickname when I was teaching at Austin Community College, I had two nicknames. One was Mr. Clean, the other was Old School, because they couldn't believe how old school I was. Well, I like old school. I like doing things from scratch. I like being creative. I have fun. Cooking is fun. If it's not fun, don't do it. Get it delivered or get it shipped and just make it. But don't get involved. But if you love cooking and you want to know how to do it, where you don't have to look up a recipe or call somebody for help. So many people have called me for help over the years, and I'm going, it's common sense. You need to have common sense, basic knowledge, and you have to have imagination and creativity. And then it's fun. You can just go one day and just get up in the morning and say, I'm going to make a soup. What kind of soup? Any kind. I have literally made thousands of different soups that no one's ever heard of, because I rarely made the same soup twice. I've made different dishes, and I've made different cakes and decorated cakes and done so much. It's all fun. All cooking is fun. So what I'm going to try to do with this is, at the Culinary Institute, our manual was the professional chef. We call it the Pro Chef. So we've named this YouTube site here after the Pro Chef, the book. And what I'm trying to do, my purpose, is to teach how to cook the same way it was taught to me. I went through there for 2 years, learned a lot, but I was told in no uncertain terms that I knew nothing by the older chefs mostly from Europe. They said, you gotta go out and work, gotta pay your dues. So there's a lot to learning it. I'm gonna try to truncate it and squeeze it all in and give you 2 years of education in, I don't know, maybe hopefully 100 lessons like this, if it takes off. So in any event, welcome. Again, my name is Ken Benson, and I'm from Connecticut originally, now live in Florida. And right now I'm here in the great Northwest, just north of Seattle, at my daughter and her husband and my granddaughter's home. My granddaughters have kidnapped me and my wife and kept us here. And my daughter, who is behind all this, she's the one that says, I've got to do these videos. So she's filming, she's producing, and you'll get to meet her in a minute, I hope. So where I want to start was the bake shop was the big thing at the Culinary Institute, because it started off, it was begun by bakers. It was bakers from the Army, got out of the Army in World War II in 1946, and those bakers said, we need a school. So they started as a baking school and soon turned into a full service culinary college. By the time I went there in 1969, we were doing everything. But you basically started off in a bake shop. And when you start off in a bake shop, you started making rolls and bread, doughs. All right, so what I want to do today is start off with bread dough. What kind of bread? There's basically two kinds of bread. There are yeast breads and there are quick breads. Quick breads are not breads. They're just a different form of cake or cookie. But breads are yeast, basically yeast breads, unless you're talking about soda bread, a few things like that. But we're going to leave it at some sort of leavened yeast. And what you do in the bake shop, I worked in a bakery a year before I went away to school, kind of like an apprentice in just outside of Boston. And I learned a lot. Worked from midnight to 8 a.m. and had all the menial jobs. I was 16 years old, but I learned a lot. You can learn so much just working. The main thing about baking that no one knows, or if you do know it, good, but most people don't know, is a baker never, ever, ever, ever measures anything. You weigh everything. If you don't have a scale, get a scale. Reason you weigh everything is because it's accurate. When I was teaching at Austin Community College, I used to have my students in groups of 2, and I'd say to each group, I said, okay, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, I just want you to measure me a cup of flour. After they measured the flour, I weighed them. And they weighed anywhere from 4 ounces to 6 ounces. So if you have a recipe that calls for 3 cups of flour and you're measuring it at 6 ounces and the other person's measuring it at 4 ounces, it's very different. It's one of the reasons you weigh it. How about eggs? 2 eggs. Large, medium, small, extra large. Weigh them. You weigh them by volume. So you weigh everything. That's very important. The next thing is going to be, if you may have never heard of it, if you haven't, you need to learn this. It makes baking so much easier, especially if you want to be creative and come up with your own formulas. There are no recipes in baking. Bakers only use formulas because when you're baking, there's chemical reactions. Cooking, you're just throwing stuff in to see how it tastes. All you're doing is pretty much is affecting the taste when you change a recipe. In baking, when you change things, it can be catastrophic. It can be good too. You never know, but it has to be accurate, and it's a formula. So what bakers use is what's called baker's math. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about bread dough. We're going to talk about lean dough. So I said there was quick doughs. We're not talking about them. In yeast doughs, there's lean dough and rich dough. Rich dough means it's got eggs, sugar, or fat, or dairy in it, along with the flour and water and yeast and salt. Lean dough has flour, water, yeast, and salt. That's it. That's all it's in it. So it can be ciabatta, it can be baguette, it can be batard, it can be hard rolls, it can be any kind of rolls, but that's it. Those are the only ingredients. So if you haven't seen or tried this method, I'm going to try to teach it to you. And this is a good way, we're going to start it in a minute, but this is a good way for you to understand baker's math. So here, formulas using baker's math. I made it as simple. Whenever I make bread, I use this formula right here. Scale comes in. I use grams, right? 1,000 grams of flour. Bread is always, how you make bread is hydration. How much liquid, how much water, not just liquid, but water. It's always based on hydration. So if I have 1,000 grams of flour and I want to make a 75% hydration, which is your average baguette, 75% hydration, that's 750 grams. 1,000 grams, 750, 75%, right? Simple, right? And then yeast is going to be anywhere from 1 to 1.5%. That's if we'll talk about what kind of yeast. So it's only going to be 10 to 15 grams of yeast. Salt is always about 2%. When I say percent, it's all based on the flour. The flour is your base, your foundation. Forget everything else. You've got 1,000. Everything else, you go as a percentage of that. So if you want to change the recipe to 2,000 grams of flour, you're going to change this to what would it be? 1,500, right? Makes sense. Simple, right? And you would change this to 40 if you want to double it. So it's so easy to double or cut in half recipes. All right, so what we're going to do today, though, as soon as I talk a little bit about the ingredients, is we're going to do a pre-ferment. A pre-ferment is a starter, but not a sourdough starter. For those of you who do sourdough and like sourdough, God bless you. I gave up on it. If you're doing it and you're having trouble, stop it. Don't do it. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. You can find recipes using pickle juice, sauerkraut juice, sour cream, whatever. You can get an acid taste if you want it. And I do like that. But the trouble you go through to make it, if you don't produce it nearly every day, is a real problem. And it's very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult to keep it going and keep it alive if you're not using it every day, or at least every other day. And I know I don't eat bread every day. I can't make bread every day. I can't do that. But in any event, so I think around the mid or late 1800s, a Polish baker came up with this starter we call it a pre-ferment now. And it was called, the French called it Polish, because it was a Polish baker that did it. So what you do is you take part of the flour and part of the water and mix them ahead of time with a tiny bit of yeast. Now it depends on how much yeast. You can leave it for 4 hours, you can leave it for 8 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, depending on how much yeast you put in it. Okay, now we're getting into the chemistry. We're going to make it with just a little pinch. So it takes no time. Boom, boom, done. The time is in what the yeast does. It works. That's why bread has its great flavor. So we're just going to talk about that for a few minutes. Bread baking started off with grain milled into flour and water. And it was flatbread. No leavening. Unleavened bread. Well, what likely happened was they had it left over and it sat out in the heat and it started fermenting. So they said, we don't want to throw it away, we're going to cook it. Boom! It rose up a little bit. And that's where we started. Now what that is, what that was there was no yeast, no manufactured yeast. You couldn't go to the supermarket and buy yeast. So that was making its own yeast with fungus that's in the air and in the grain. Natural, that's what sourdough is. And that's fine, that's great. I love sourdough. Don't ever get me wrong, sourdough is great. But, so what happened was bread was always like that. And the French, famous for their bread, were making these basically sourdough loaves that they'd start, a few days earlier, and they'd mix them over a period of a day or two, and then bake them. And they were delicious. Then all of a sudden, the advent of bakeries, of brewers said, we have this leftover yeast that we're making from, what are we going to do with it? Let's sell it to the bakeries. So they sold it to the bakeries, and the bakers said, this is great. We can put it in and boom, have bread in a few hours. Then the other thing that happened was electricity, mixers. So for thousands of years, no one needed dough. You just mixed it, and then you'd fold it and wait, fold it and wait, fold it and wait. You never needed it. So it would create all these things. So what happens over time? Time is the most important factor in a lean dough. Over time, amylase forms, and it creates all these different flavors going on in there, and sugars. It turns starch into sugar, which happens in sourdough. So you get starch, you turn it into sugar, and sometimes in alcohol, which is not a good thing for bread. But the amylase enzymes are the flavor. They turn starch into sugar. If you notice when you get a really good baguette and you cut it, you have these big holes in it, right? If you're kneading a dough and knocking those holes out, you're not going to have them, right? Wonder Bread has no big holes. All right, a good baguette will have these big holes, and you look at those holes and they shine. It's flour and water. Why would it shine? Because it's created some sugars. It's not going to be sweet, but it has these flavors that are wonderful. So that's the way it was until the late 1800s. And then the French people had the new kind of bread that they could make in 2 hours. I can right now put together and in 2 hours have a bread in the oven. So instead of them taking so long and having to go in at all hours of the night, the day before, and go through this long process, they had bread fast with white flour, and everybody loved their white flour. And they had it so fast, and they called it pancho, hot bread. And they could then say, okay, we're getting low on bread, make another batch. Whereas the other way, they couldn't. They had to wait till the next day. So that's what happened. And then there was a renaissance, probably started in the 70s and 80s, as a lot of you out there might have been part of, as you see everywhere you go now, Whole Foods or whoever, they're artisan breads. They weren't there. When I was growing up, there was no artisan bread. You had Italian bread, French bread, not even French bread, you had Italian bread, but that was stuff that was made quickly. There were no big holes in it. There was no flavor. It was just Wonder Bread in a shape rather than a pan. So now we're getting back to this. So you can make the simplest bread I can tell you to make. You can't mess it up. It's the simplest I can tell you to make. Is we're going to make this one 1,750 water, 75% hydration, and we're going to make this, and it's going to take, from today, we're going to start the starter, the poolish. There's also a biga. If you hear of a biga, that's another pre-ferment, another starter. The only difference is it's less water and more flour, so it's thick like a dough. Poolish is going to be, funny name, because it looks like a pool. So we're going to make that, and then in the next video, I'll show you where you develop all the nooks and crannies, let's say, all those holes. And you don't need it. You don't have to need it. Okay, why did you need bread in the first place? Why did you need bread in the first place? To develop gluten. We go back to me as a little 6 or 7-year-old. My grandma would make this Swedish cardamom braid. Gosh, it was that good. I ate so much of that. But I helped her every time she made it. I don't know how often she made it, but I was always there with her. And it fascinated me that we had to take the cardamom and take it out of its shell there and muddle it and make it into like this paste. And we'd put this in this flour mixture with sugar and butter. And then we'd mix it, and then we'd have to knead it. And I was the kneading guy, and I knew all about kneading bread. I needed 10 minutes, 12 minutes. I kneaded it until my grandmother said, hey, it's ready. So I know about kneading, but that was so good, that bread. That's one of the reasons why I had to get to do this for a living. So, what we're doing when you're developing gluten, what is gluten? Gluten is unique to wheat. There's lots of different kinds of wheat. Gluten is only in wheat. It's not in oats, it's not in other grains. It's in wheat grains, all different wheat grains, rye, whatever it is. And there's various amounts of gluten in there. But what gluten is it's two proteins. They're there in the grain. They're glutenin and gliadin. Glutenin is fairly straight. Gliadin is kind of wacky. And I say it's kind of like pickup sticks. You take pickup sticks and throw them out, throw them down. They're all over the place. When you knead, you're starting to get them all in line, and they get stronger. It's like a spinning wheel, or when making rope. You've got all these little fibers. They don't do you any good until you get them all together. So the more you knead it, the more they go together. If you ever made bread, you'll notice if you have it fermented and it's doubled, and you go to shape it, and then say, well, I don't like that shape, and you try to shape it again, it fights back. Every time you move it, it's like building muscles. It's like at the gym. So you've got this dough evolving, and it's at the gym, and you're stretching it and stretching it and stretching it. That's what we do, is we stretch it. Every time you stretch it, you're developing gluten, and you're also developing enzymes. So you're developing flavor and gluten without going through all the hard work. We have a machine. Katie's got a beautiful 6-quart KitchenAid over there. We could get a dough hook and make it, but it wouldn't be as good as this. Everything would knock out all the air, and we want air in it. So this is so easy, so simple. So all we're going to do today, and I'll leave you alone, all I'm going to do today is make the poolish. If you don't know the word, learn it. All right, so I'm going to put a bowl on here, start it up, and I'm at 0 grams, right? And what I said I'm going to make 250 grams of flour, 250 grams of water. Now this is all-purpose flour. I'll talk a little bit more about the different types of flour in a minute. Book 262, 240. This does not have to be exact. 250, okay. Now, yeast. Talk about the yeast. Instant yeast would be the best because you don't have to put it in water. This is not instant, this is active, but I still don't put it in water, it still works. All right, so you're talking about a pinch. How much is a pinch? Let's see. That was a real, can't even see it on camera, right? Katie, was it just a little pinch, right? Okay.
Tiny pinch.
All right, tiny pinch. Depends on how much pinch you put. Now I'm going to zero this out. And I'm going to put in how many grams of water?
250?
250. Perfect. And then you can take anything you want. You could take a spoon, a knife, doesn't matter. Knife, spoon, fork. I'll use the back of the knife, it's probably easiest. Odd, but true. So all you're going to do is just blend it. Any big lumps, you want to get any big lumps out. You're not looking to make a smooth dough. You don't need a smooth dough. And as a baker and a chef, you do get flour, you do make a mess. And you know what? That's why they taught you, clean as you go. That's it, that's done, right? So we'll put that there, put it aside, put the lid on it, and wait until tomorrow. Or the next day, if that wasn't enough yeast, I might have to wait more than 24. I might have to wait 36 hours. But you'll get to know how long it takes depending on where you are. Is your house cold? Is your house warm? That makes a difference. But that was it. There was no work. Was that hard? No, no work. Now the rest of it, tomorrow's going to be not much more work than that. Easy. And it's going to be, you're going to say, I'm going to make a ciabatta or a baguette. It's going to be the best bread you ever made. And that's all. So that's it for today. So I just want to thank you for stopping by. And then I'm looking forward to tomorrow and getting this bread finished.